Understand your brand's performance and stand out from your competitors with Launchmetrics, the leading software, data, and insights company in fashion, lifestyle, and beauty. From events management and sample tracking to PR monitoring and benchmarking, Launchmetrics helps over 1,700 brands execute their launches with the metrics that drive strategy. Visit launchmetrics.com to request a demo today.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining BOF Live. Welcome. My name is Shenel Wickramaratne. I'm a content strategist at the Business of Fashion. Welcome to our latest thought leadership event. This one is entitled Rethinking Success Metrics for Brand Ambassadors. The inspiration for this conversation was a report published by Launchmetrics entitled Brand Ambassador Marketing 2025. The report identifies a growing preference for long-term value-based partnerships that reflect a brand's ethos and foster trust among consumers. Today's top performing ambassadors are not simply the faces of campaigns, but they're storytellers who bring credibility, community, and creative alignment. To dig into this topic further, I'm delighted to have my esteemed panelists with me today. Firstly, Alison Bringé, who is the Chief Marketing Officer at Launchmetrics, the brand performance authority behind fashion, luxury, and beauty brands such as Fendi, Chloe, Shiseido, and Swarovski. Under Alison's leadership, Launchmetrics has pioneered Media Impact Value, or MIV, which is the proprietary framework that's become an industry benchmark for measuring the true impact of a brand's activity across digital, social, and print platforms. Alison, it's such a pleasure to have you with us today.
I'm so excited to be here too, and you perfectly pronounced my last name, so I appreciate it. I guess you've been practicing backstage, so.
Thank you so much. Secondly, joining us is Nicole Baum, who is the global head of marketing at Moschino, the house synonymous with playful irreverence and cultural impact. Nicole has spearheaded campaigns that fuse bold creativity and community building, driving organic engagement across platforms like TikTok and shaping Moschino's distinct voice in contemporary fashion culture. Nicole, it's such a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you so much. It's really wonderful to be with all of you.
And I'm also delighted to be joined by Carlota Rodben, who is the founder of Beyond Luxury Group and co-founder of Memora. Carlota advises brands on innovation strategies and premiumization, and is a prolific commentator on how brand building shapes culture in today's luxury landscape. Through her work with Memora, an early-stage platform, Carlota is helping to build the infrastructure for a new category of investable assets, where cultural icons, artists, and creators can auction meaningful pieces directly to their fans and collectors while supporting the causes that they believe in. Thank you so much for being with us, Carlota.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
So here is how today's conversation will unfold. We'll start by looking at how the brand ambassador model itself is evolving from traditional celebrity endorsements to a multi-dimensional approach that's shaped by authenticity and community alignment. We'll then dive into how to measure influence beyond mere reach, focusing on what Launchmetrics calls the indirect echo of campaigns. And finally, we will explore how brands can harness cultural and qualitative intelligence to make faster, smarter, and more resonant decisions. A brief bit of housekeeping before we jump in. BOF Lives are community events, so please do interact in the chat function. I've seen a couple of you, but please let us know where you're tuning in from, engage with each other, and of course, feel free to ask us any questions. Our wonderful panelists will endeavour to answer all of the questions related to the topic that we are discussing today. So with all of that said, let's begin. I'd like to first set the scene on how brand ambassadorship has transformed over the past decade. Historically, partnerships were centered around celebrity endorsement, which provided a straightforward avenue for visibility. However, as consumer expectations have evolved, so has this role of the brand ambassador. Carlota, I would love to start with you. From your vantage point advising premium brands, how are consumer expectations changing what it means to be a brand ambassador today?
Absolutely. That's a very interesting question because we're at a point where truly the rules of ambassadorship have completely shifted, right? You just mentioned it, but it's really no longer just about fame. It's really about emotional fluency. And emotional fluency and cultural relevancy come hand in hand very much. And normally it's the way that a person or this ambassador will embody a brand's values with depth, creativity, and humanity, which humanity is a very important part of that equation. And especially after coming back from Cannes a couple weeks ago, the shift is really undeniable to see what today ambassadors are doing and what consumers are looking for and what audiences are looking for. And it's not really looking at top performers or top athletes or top craftsmen or top anyone at their skill, but they're looking for storytellers. And these talents today are becoming storytellers, are becoming content creators, are becoming activists, investors, and truly cultural anchors. And that is what brings these talents to really be able to start building a form of leadership through narrative. And that's the shift of building leadership through narrative versus building leadership through visibility, which is where we were at before with ambassadors for brands. And I think this brings a very interesting thought around the new modern renaissance period for talent today and for icons and for public figures, which is this era where we're bringing on these talents that are Renaissance people, right? Where we can look at Cristiano Ronaldo or Selena Gomez or Lewis Hamilton or Pharrell Williams. They are truly creating creative ecosystems around themselves, and they're not just going onto a trend and talking about it. They're truly shaping style. They are setting business trends. They are investing in ventures. They are starting powerful conversations. And all of these are becoming new ways and new channels to speak to audiences. And they're becoming a very important part of how we do this today.
Thank you for that, Carlota. Alison, what is your perspective on the shift from traditional endorsements to a more multi-dimensional model?
Yeah, I think I think a lot of what Carlota, sorry, yeah, it's going to confuse me the whole time. Even if I have a very good friend named Carlota, but we call her Carly. I think what Carly over here said is true. I think if we think back to when, let's say, influencer marketing or ambassador marketing really was kind of starting to boom almost a decade ago, it feels very different than what it is today. And I think the expectation that brands have from these creators or talents or muses has really changed because the way that we talk to our customer has really changed, right? I also think, previously it was very cookie cutter. You would, almost like buying advertising. You would say, I'm giving you this amount of money and I want to get X. And when the campaign's over, goodbye. Now it's a lot more about continuity, the customer, and we'll talk about this, I guess, a lot because I somehow always bring it up over and over, but the customer is more demanding and they're smarter than ever before, right? They know when they're being lied to, they know when brands are doing pay for play, and they have no problem that brands pay ambassadors because everyone has to eat, but they want to make sure that brands are working with ambassadors, whether it's creators or influencers, that really align with their values and the values that they see are those of the brand. So I think it's a much smarter world of how this concept of brand ambassador marketing is working. And I think on the flip side, how brands and are evaluating how these relationships are working are more than, okay, you post this or you create this and this is that ROI, because it's really now about this kind of full funnel campaign about how do you create awareness for my brand? How do you create legitimacy? What does this relationship mean in the public eye? And it's been really interesting, right? And I think, in the report that obviously everyone joining today has the ability to download, it was just really interesting to see that 60% of marketers still can't understand how to measure the ROI of these campaigns. And as I said, for me, brand ambassador marketing has been like the ethos of fashion, lifestyle, and beauty brands for more than a decade. So I think it's just a reminder that this industry is constantly changing. And if you're one of that 60%, you're not alone. That now, though, that there are tools, there are resources, there are people out there to help you dissect this and understand it. So obviously, it means our webinar today is even more important than ever to kind of start that conversation and hopefully create an important dialogue between us and the brand marketers out there.
I'd love to double click into that a little bit further, Alison. So, of course, if authenticity now and engagement are being increasingly prioritized over sheer reach, just how can brands evaluate or identify these right kinds of ambassadors that they should be partnering with today?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you know Launchmetrics, you know that we've been working with media impact value, which has become the kind of standardized metric. I mean, anybody that opens up BOF every day has seen some article by one of the editors where they've asked us for some data about something as maybe this is too political, the Jeff Bezos wedding this weekend, which for me was very boring. But of course, everyone still was curious to know how much Dolce & Gabbana generated in media impact value for that dress. That's really become the industry standard of how brands are quantifying things. But as Carlota mentioned, in this like new renaissance of brand ambassador marketing, it's not just, and this is how we talk about at Launchmetrics, it's not just where you're showing up, but it's why you're showing up. How are you a part of that conversation? How are you a part of that emotional connection? So I don't want to get too much into it now because I know we still have another 50 minutes, but for us, what's shaping the future of measurement is looking at both the qualitative and the quantitative. And this qualitative layer, I think it's going to take some education on the industry part because obviously it's new. How do you evaluate a feeling? But that's something in this report that we've started to do, specifically looking at how brand ambassadors are influencing those emotional connections you have with your customer, what that means for your brand. And this is something at Launchmetrics we'll be continuing to produce educational content on for the rest of the year because we think it's a really important direction to consider in this new renaissance. I'm going to start quoting you, Carlota, all the time.
The new renaissance. Nicole, I would love to turn to you. How do you at Moschino identify brand ambassadors and collaborators today? And how has that evolved over time?
So, and we talked about this last week, Moschino has a really different situation in the sense that we are a brand with an incredible brand awareness that far surpasses the size of our brand. So during our creative director, our past creative director's time, we were able to field many, many organic opportunities with huge brand friends of the house, let's say, and virtually at zero cost. And this built our awareness to unprecedented levels while the business was still quite small. And what that leaves me with today, when we have a new creative director, a real switch in our brand shift from a product offering, we're really changing gears as a brand, is trying to explain what sort of the new Moschino is from a product perspective. We're relating much more to the heritage of the brand, whereas in the last 10 years, we never were speaking about heritage. And so the first opportunity when I started in my role was to work with brand ambassadors or seek out potential new friends of Moschino that had a real love and understanding of the heritage of the brand. I sort of had to skip the last 10 years, which had been such an iconic moment for the brand, but so marked and so specific. So for me, when I had to look at these new friends, I had to go really comb through, do some incredible Alice in Wonderland rabbit holes to also because my budgets are quite small, and that's going to be a constant theme when you ask me questions today. I have to remind that we have extremely, extremely small budgets, especially because we're a brand that has been spoiled by organic mentions for a decade. So let's say that the culture of building a budget for this never existed. I'm trying to bring that slowly. So we went really to the basics of combing through people that were going to celebrate the heritage of Moschino and go into really some of the iconic codes of the house and bring that to life. Again, storytellers, but it was also extremely important that we were adding that layer of storytelling already like 2.5 years ago. So, you know, we were able to get on some talents that still hadn't gotten any visibility from brands. And since working with us, have started to go to the big players. And we're really proud of that. Our goal is to always work with these smaller niche, you know, fashion lovers that maybe are just starting a new format or just gaining traction. So that's sort of our goal. And since that initial start, the evolution now is going with artists. So now we work outside of the fashion world and we go with people that can recreate or align their goals and how they like to present their art in a way that's similar to ours. So we'll go to a creator that makes pearl drawings with little pearls, and she'll recreate one of our bags in her pearl artistry. So really unexpected things. Or a woman that makes gorgeous cakes and she makes one of our key it bags as a cake. So that's been sort of an evolution to keep people on their toes and to create a lot of engagement.
Amazing. And
Now, I was going to say, just to jump in, one thing I think Nicole said that was super interesting is about friends of the brand and obviously about the budget. I think like most of the time when we work with, well, Moschino, to be fair, is not a smaller brand, but a lot of people on the call might have their own smaller brand. And the question we get to is like, I don't have a lot of budget. How do I manage gifting? Is that even relevant, or discounts? And I think it's really important to remember that you should have your brand ambassadors if you have the budget that you pay, but think about those goals and then really lean into the friends of the brand when you know that they align with your goals and strategy. And they both can deliver a lot of value. I mean, we looked at the MIV, the media impact value for Alo Yoga, and one thing that was really interesting is some of the friends of the brand were generating just as much as paid ambassadors. And I think that just shows that you don't always have to have huge budgets, because there are a lot of people out there when you cultivate that authentic connection that can do a lot for your brand. So it's great that Nicole brought that up, because I think people always have this misconception of like big budgets, big brands, that's all you have to do to work in this space.
You say we're a big brand, and we are in terms of brand awareness, but you would be shocked at how tiny or non-existent our budgets are. In fact, a lot of our goal is gifting, and we work in different ways, and we're very creative with how we can sort of make friendly deals with all of the friends of the brand, let's say.
Fantastic. You've both created the most fabulous segue for me to move on to our next topic. So we're going to think now about how brands can go beyond those surface level metrics and measure what Launchmetrics is entitled indirect echo. So the ripple effect of campaigns through media and through creator engagement beyond the ambassador's own channels. Carlota, I would love to hear from you, in your view, what makes a campaign culturally resonant? You know, something that people want to talk about, they want to remix, and they want to reference.
Yeah, I think that Nicole was just talking about something very interesting, and the example of the cake, right? And bringing the cake into being a bag, an iconic bag through the lens of a cake. It's really that cultural resonance and that way of standing out and being able to have that authenticity that really moves campaigns forward in a conversation. It's really not about how we show up in someone's feed or on a billboard or in any other way that that campaign is going to be manifested, but it's how we're actually entering a new conversation. And today, entering conversations and having a voice in the conversation that is happening culturally is an absolute must-have for brands. And sometimes it doesn't necessarily have to be through the voice of the brand. It can be through the voice of those ambassadors that are voicing that story and bringing those people in their audience into the story of the brand. And I deeply believe that it needs to also feel as personal as it can be, and those things can truly happen or manifest through alignment on codes of communities, on the values of those communities, on the emotions that community has, so they can recognize themselves in that story, or at least if they can't recognize themselves now, they can aspire to recognize themselves soon. And that is true resonance in a brand. And a lot of brands have completely understood how to start segueing into this and understand that it's not a monologue. I think a lot of, especially luxury brands, got caught into that years past, on having a narrative that was imposed, a very top-down narrative that was imposed and seemed like a monologue. It worked for the audience of that time. And now we're seeing an audience that completely is looking for something else. And it's a game of call and response. I think it's a dialogue between a lot of different players, and mostly that dialogue can truly bring impact when there's space for interpretation of the message that is being sent over. And I think that to add on to how those brands are truly getting in or kind of switching that knack, it's interesting to see how brands, for example, that are even brands that are really used to holding a narrative and holding an image so tightly, are also able now and open to look at creators that are showing more vulnerability, are showing more passions, and are showing more about their dreams. And it's not like they didn't have them before, but it was just not being talked about in the conversation. And you see today, one good example, she's very big in the Latin world, but her name is Soleon. She's a Mexican content creator, has about 650,000 followers. Fun fact, she actually went to my university in USC in LA. But basically, she has become an influential voice in fashion and beauty and lifestyle. And she is a storyteller that plays with humor, that plays with a very ecstatic, vibrant energy, and that always is touching cultural nuances. And she has been doing a lot of collaborations with a lot of brands. And lately, she had a collaboration with Shenel, and it really showed a very beautiful way that Shenel is now being open to have, and redefining the way that they've been sharing stories in the past, to have these content creators that are completely redefining the way that the stories are being relevant to younger audiences, and taking this originality and this commentator and this radically honest and bold messaging way of speaking and of telling a narrative that is actually helping them drastically have a voice that has a lot more weight, and that is allowing essentially audiences and communities to resonate so much more with their that sort of either persona or public figure or content creator or talent or icon, whatever we want to call it, call them, that are actually either friends of the house or brand ambassadors that are truly telling their stories with their own storytelling, their own narrative that resonates with truth, because the audience knows that that is the way that that talent tells their story. And so it makes a complete different impact on how that story is received, and that kind of authenticity and being unapologetically human is really what today people are looking for. They're not looking for a perfect story of a brand. They're looking for, where is that vulnerability and where is that struggle and where is that human side of people. And just to wrap it up, this is one of the reasons why athletes have been some of the biggest talents with the biggest amount of fandom in the past, because you see that athlete, you can see them on billboards, but you also see them on the court in their game, suffering, maybe smashing their racket, let's say, and you still applaud and you still are there with them and you still resonate because you know you've been in that position, you've been frustrated, you've been this far from winning or this far from losing, and how that human part of us really manifests is it's that emotional and that authentic and that very human side of us that makes us connect. And that's where brands today, and that's where, going back to your question, that's where brands and campaigns for brands really need to like mold it back in to understand that cultural resonance comes from the authentic storytelling and narrative of that ambassador. And there needs to be more fluidness to co-author these narratives instead of telling how that ambassadorship how that partnership needs to evolve, or how they need to tell the stories of the products or of the brand or of the story of the brand.
Absolutely. Alison, could you share more about Launchmetrics' approach here? I mentioned in the beginning about indirect echo, obviously highlighting that ripple effect of campaigns. Could you speak more to that metric and explain how that differs from traditional impressions and why it's so critical in today's landscape?
Yeah, of course. And actually, I was thinking the same, that maybe a lot of people on the call hear this concept of voice echo or indirect or direct, and they're not really clear what that means. So I said it before, like previously you would book a celebrity or you'd book a creator to do some work for you, and you would measure, let's say it was a creator, you would measure your success metrics, your ROI metrics specifically on that post. So the lens that we look through typically before would be, what was the media impact value of that Instagram post that XYZ influencer generated for you. But what we've started to realize too is that the value of these partnerships go far beyond just one post. And brands, for many reasons, haven't been monitoring that. The reason why is because obviously not in Nicole's team, because she has to do everything. But at some companies, they have the pleasure of having someone that manages VIPs, someone that manages affiliates, someone that does PR, someone that does advertising campaigns, and the creative ambassadors involved in there. And those people never speak because everyone has their own job to do, and no one cares about anyone else's success about their own because they have their own KPIs. But what we started to realize over the years is that as brands are investing, and in the report, we saw that at minimum, brands might spend $500,000 on brand ambassadors in a year, and that's quite low, right? That's considering creators more than, let's say, celebrities. That it's just a lot of money to spend when you don't know how to measure the ROI, and your ROI barometer is, what did I get for that one Instagram post? So we've been working with our clients, and we've developed this kind of lens that we call the voice echo framework. And it allows you to measure first, like, what's the direct impact of the ambassador? So if we think about Selena Gomez and her collaboration with Bulgari, the direct impact of the ambassador is what she posted, for example, on her Instagram account, and what that was worth. Then there's the direct impact of the brand's ability to create value from the content they shoot with that ambassador. So that was Bulgari posting about Selena Gomez on the Bulgari Instagram channel. Then the third bit is the indirect echo, and that today has become almost more important than what the celebrity or the creator themselves generate. Of course, we know at Launchmetrics that celebrities create, let's say, more indirect echo than influencers, because influencers are content creators. Their job is to create value for you with their community. But equally, both are just as important in this concept of, like, how do you create, and I think Carlota used this word before, resonance in today's very overcrowded marketplace. So on average, we've seen that for good campaigns, the industry standard is that 77% of the media impact value generated from a campaign with an ambassador should be generated from the indirect echo. So that's all the media, that's the other influencers posting about it, it's all of the other third parties creating that conversation. And we know when things are, really, really crowded, when the landscape's really crowded, that additional layer, that other conversation is what is actually going to help you cut through the noise. It's going to make your story relevant. It's going to make people pay attention. And that's how we define true value. So again, it's maybe an incentive for companies to start, the CMO to really start putting pressure on all of these different departments to start working together and saying, okay, we booked Selena Gomez for the advertising campaign. What else can we do? I mean, in the report, we highlighted the collaboration with IWC and Lewis Hamilton, and their PR team did a great job of not just, okay, he's in this campaign, but how do we get him to continue to promote the product? Okay, how do we then create more value about that product and that collaboration through a charitable initiative? So absolutely, I think, it's not just being able to measure immediate impact value anymore. It's being able to measure what was the strategy and did it work? And Kirsten, to answer your question, yes, I'm pretty sure we'll share it in the webinar chat. If not, you can go to launchmetrics.com and look for Brand Ambassador Marketing 2025 and download the report. And I wanted to also call out my favorite comment in the webinar so far is the person that said, I'm dialing in from my house. Hi. That was really cute. So hi to you too.
Amazing, thank you. Nicole, I'd love to turn to you now. When we caught up last week in the preparation for this call, you spoke about going back to grassroots. You spoke today about partnering directly with those micro creators, those niche communities. How do you at Moschino identify those hidden voices and then turn those into broader brand moments?
So it's a ton of research. We do not have an agency. We do not work with anyone external. We're a very small team and it's a lot of passion. We literally sit and scour and look. I send DMs to people on my team with regards to creators. In fact, we find many, many of our talents that way. Talents, our friends, our creators. And we then just send them a DM and reach out to them. I mean, it is very old school, let's say, but we love that approach because I think that approach takes that corporate-y machine feeling out of the whole relationship. We try to, where we can't reach budgets, find a friendly deal where we give them the gift that they love. But also we have this amazing opportunity because, so many people come to us. We have products. Obviously, we have more simple products that we like to push and that are important for business, but we have viral products. We have products that that sell themselves almost. We have a bag that looks like spaghetti with little tomatoes in it. I mean, there are people banging down our door to get a sample of that bag so that they can tell a story with it. Because now with everyone, the formats, the business behind it all has become so excruciating, I think, for these ambassadors as well. And of course, I'm not talking about the bigger deals and the athletes, which are also heartwarming. I'm talking more in the nitty-gritty fashion of it all. In my kind of smaller world, they're banging down our doors to get their hands on a product that they can use to tell extremely compelling stories. And we're so happy to work with them and get them that product and, give them the opportunity to tell the story. So, the product in and of itself, in fact, that's why so many brands we have this whole section of our collection, which is like the item bags, which are these wild handbags or really particular shoes or a really particular ready-to-wear garment. And, so many brands, even the most, strict and simple and straightforward, have opted to make these more wild things because out of their comfort zone and out of their codes, because I believe that they too are having product to fulfill a marketing need so that they can then seed things to tell stories. That's, you know, what we talk about in the office. And that's really the heritage of Moschino, to already have that. And that makes things much easier for us. We went viral. We were the third biggest brand, according, I think, to BOF at the fall winter fashion shows in 2020, these last ones that we just had, for this spaghetti bag that had this insanely viral moment. And then it was, you know, featured in Vogue just 3 days later or 5 days later. And this bag made us the third biggest talked about brand at Milan Fashion Week, which is not anywhere. We never sit in those numbers in the last years, you know, and that's all because of this wild bag that will hit stores in the next month. And you better be sure that we're going to push and do as much as we can with our friends to build friends of the house, to like build stories around that, to create a smile also.
I've got to get myself one of these spaghetti bags. Alison, Nicole talked about tapping into heritage. What are some other ways that brands can intentionally design their campaigns to encourage that kind of organic amplification?
Yeah, you know, at Launchmetrics, we've been working on, as I mentioned, this qualitative analysis. So in the brand ambassador marketing report, we looked at a few ambassadors and how they not just drove MIV, but how this, again, this emotional connection was developed between them and their audiences for these brands. And what was really interesting was that more than 50% of the results from the analysis show that it was really the brand, like ethos of the brand ambassador, that was driving kind of the values of that campaign. So it shows, again, it comes back to that topic of, you know, the customer is really smart. They want to make sure that you're working with brands that kind of align with your own values, and the values that they see are the reason that they follow you. So I think in this kind of next generation of metrics and how we define success, looking at these different, let's say, brand dimensions or these different pillars are going to be really important to see how you're resonating with different audiences or with your own audience. And I thought what was really, really interesting is, like, in the report itself, we broke it down into 3 categories, right? So I talked a little bit before about how Lewis Hamilton had partnered with IWC, and part of that collaboration was, of course, linked to product, and product is important, right? So that was one of the categories we analyzed. How do brand ambassadors influence product strategy? We also looked at how brand ambassadors influence cultural relevance and brand values, which is kind of what I was alluding to before. And the last one was audience and lifestyle connection. So in the example, we looked at Nara Smith, who I guess most of you guys know. We looked at the campaign she did with Marc Jacobs and H&M, and she's really known for this creative, inspired, kind of domestic inspired content, right? All of her like elaborately made meals, obviously from scratch, all wearing designer clothing. And as I mentioned, like going back to that concept, right? More than 50%. So I think in her case, it was like 53% of all the values we identified were really centered on this lifestyle and audience connection. And again, going back to kind of some of the themes we spoke about earlier in the webinar, that in this day and age, it's about authenticity. It's about like finding your, I think Carlota, you said, or Nicole, like your community, your tribe, that is going to be the parameter of success, I think, in the future, right? I think when brands want to understand, did they create something meaningful, or when they want to select an ambassador to understand, you know, what really should drive my selection process, I think it's understanding like what are the codes of that ambassador and how will those codes either change the perception of your brand. So of course we know that there's like a lot of, let's say, affordable luxury brands out there that have been going through repositioning lately, and they're trying to figure out how do they do that. Well, ambassadors are a great vehicle to be able to do that, but understanding what these people represent, I think that is going to be critical. So I'm excited to see how this new form of measurement evolves. I'm excited to see like how the industry responds. I think obviously quantitative measurement is easy, and I think for executives sometimes, right, it's actually the same concept with influencer marketing. When it first came out, people were like, oh, this is great. It's a new vehicle. Like we can pay this influencer way less than we can pay an ambassador, and we're gonna get so much for it. And then after a while, they're like, oh, but I need like a ROI. And you're like, well, the ROI is we have a million more fans. And they're like, well, what does that mean? For them, if you can't really quantify things in dollars and cents, I think some executives, it's hard to understand the true value. But I think in this moment where, and BOF said this really great in the state of, I guess it's the state of fashion last year, that we used to have this moment, right, where people cared about performance marketing, but we became so obsessed with like click to purchase. And of course, I know we need to make money, right? This isn't a charity that we all work in. But the customer has become really finicky and they need more to continue to come back and buy your product. So in a moment where we need this, or we're in this moment of destination uncertain, we need to build this long-term emotional connection with our customers to keep them and to increase our share of wallet. So I'm sure that qualitative metrics is going to help bridge that gap of what we haven't been able to solve with just quantitative metrics.
Amazing. This is exactly what I'd want to talk about in our final segment. Carlota, I would love to hear from you. What are some of the cultural blind spots that you see when brands are focusing, I guess, too narrowly on these performance metrics or short-term ROI, as Alison was mentioning?
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest blind spots is assuming that what you can measure is what matters most, right? And it's a perfect segue to Alison, what you were saying, because you can hit all of those KPIs and still lose cultural relevance. So it's so important to be looking at those harder to measure metrics, which are not super evident all the time. And a lot of, I mean, the 2024 McKinsey report found that there was 80% of CMOs that really cared and aimed to have and build emotional connection with their audience, yet only 25% actually measured emotional or cultural resonance, which is a big disconnect, but it makes sense because it's just a lot harder to quantify. And it does take a lot longer because it's not a one shot and it's not something that you could do short term. It's a long-term brand equity that you need to kind of go on the journey with. And most brands, because it's easier and because a lot of times when we get together and the C-suite gets together and they need to look at metrics, or teams get together and they need to look at how they've performed, the easiest thing to do is to rely on traditional engagement metrics, right? Likes, impressions, et cetera, with all these ambassador campaigns to see how that ambassador has performed and to see if we want him or her or whoever is on the campaign in the future. But these are very surface level numbers and rarely capture the true ripple effects that actually Alison was speaking about a lot earlier, and also Nicole was speaking about, right? This is something that it's a ripple effect, and sometimes it's not, you can't even explain how it happened, but this is what truly grasps that emotional context and that community reaction and that cultural momentum that starts building is the power of that campaign and is what is the majority of the value that comes out of a post or a campaign or anything that is out there with a brand ambassador. It's the amplification of that media. It's the fan interpretation of what has been consumed and received. And it's that those adjacent mentions, those ripple effects that happen where true influence is multiplying and which is actually giving that campaign its resonance in the moment of time, in the culture of time. And then there's a second blind spot that I think is important as well to look into, and it's treating culture as some like stagnant target, which I see brands talking about a lot just because we want to be in what's going on, and it's not easy to not do it. But it's when we're treating culture as a stagnant target and we want to be in there, rather than looking at it as a target, rather than looking at it as a conversation where we need to participate in, can be an enemy in the end, or a false enemy. It looks like it's a friend, but really what we're doing is that we're measuring success in short bursts, and short bursts don't work with long-term conversation and long-term community building and fostering of that trust with clients and with audiences that are potential clients in the future, right? And so I think a perfect example of a brand that did this pristinely is Loewe and their success on TikTok. They really, instead of looking at how can we target that culture, they started creating that culture. And instead of acting like a traditional luxury brand with their traditional luxury codes and showing up in those social platforms in the way that we would expect a brand to show up, they started leaning into surrealism and emotional expressiveness, and truly resonated with those niche fashion communities that were on TikTok, and not only jumped onto a cultural conversation, but led it with such force that it contributed. I think it was the McKinsey and BOF State of Fashion report that also had this metric, but it contributed up to a 15% in an uplift in that media value of Loewe, just because of the way they showed up, and not because it was polished, but because they were truly being authentic with themselves. And this high emotional resonance, how can we measure it? That is the big question. And truly what we're looking at right now is, and what teams and brands should be asking themselves is, are we measuring what truly matters? And or actually, are we chasing some metrics, some KPIs, some numbers that are easy to report for teams, for reports, for people to understand if an ambassador was successful or not? Or are we just reporting numbers that are just as easy to collect than to forget, because they're actually not bringing that cultural impact and long-term game and that resonance in the future, which can only be built if a brand is listening and adapting and building trust over time.
Absolutely. To kind of expand on that, Nicole, how do you train your teams to be the first in that creative, race to content, spotting that cultural spark, and then converting those into those on-brand moments before anyone else?
It kind of ties in with my previous response. We organically research all day and every day. Our goals are to have a very wide scope in terms of what type of friend we could make in terms of creator. Our goal is to try to get there first. That happened. There's literally have been times where we find someone that could be great for us, and they've just like 2 days later started doing a collaboration before we've even had a chance to reach out, maybe with another brand. So, working with someone when they're just starting this step of their growth as a creator is always fun for us, because it gives us an opportunity to have that freshness and initial feeling. We have some content and some projects coming out in that way very soon. And then again, as I was saying before, very wide scopes of interest with our creators, with our friends, in the sense that we go from people that dance, people that do wildly different types of art and use different types of mediums, comedy, many different types of approaches to reach out and connect our brand and to put our our tone of voice through the lens of someone else in an unexpected world. That for us is really important. So that's sort of what we work on a daily basis, including when we find creators that just make content for us that are not ambassadors and not being tagged or not about the relationship with them, but even the creators that we use to do unexpected content. One of the things that our creative director asks us for is this sort of like on purpose chaos. So we're trying to be really unexpected and a little bit wild in the content that we do. I'm really proud of the work that we do, considering our small budgets and our small team, because we're able to pivot and do many different types of things. And so it's just a lot of hard work.
Totally. Alison, I'd love to turn back to you now. For everyone watching, how can brands translate those abstract insights, what we've spoken about, sentiment, cultural relevance, emotional resonance, into actionable strategies?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is for brands to first agree on what is the goal, right? Like some brands think the goal is always sales, but it's not, right? You go through moments where maybe you have a lot of brand awareness, but you're expanding to a new category and nobody knows that you're expanding to this category. So of course, long term, again, you want to make sales, but you have a lot of work to do before you get there. Maybe you have a new creative director and you need to introduce him because maybe your fans or your followers, they don't know if this is the brand that they thought you always were. So I think it's important for the leadership team of brands to kind of be aligned on that before planning a campaign. And then, as I said, I think for us at Launchmetrics, really, we look at three things. We look at visibility. So visibility, of course, is powered by media impact value. It's where you're showing up. But then we look at relevance and identity. So coming back to that concept of, is this who you are? I mean, I used to joke a lot too, and this is like a very American analogy, but some brands would be like, we're a Vogue brand. And like most of your consumers are like teenagers. So maybe you're aspirationally a Vogue brand, but that's not your identity today. So either you need to shift your product or you need to shift your identity or your own brand perception. And then I think relevance. How relevant is your brand to what's happening in this moment of cultural currency, right? I don't think every brand, do I think Hermès is trying to be like a cool hipster kind of streetwear brand? No. But I think there's a relevance category for every single brand, but they need to define what is relevant, who is their audience, what messages are they trying to get across. And I think if a brand can really have metrics to understand their identity, their relevance, and of course, their visibility, that kind of three-prong approach will really help them succeed, whether it is something like a repositioning or introducing a new creative director or trying to make a new product or a new product line successful. But I think that's the lens that we all need to start thinking about as we enter this Renaissance era. It's just this new moment where there's going to be more and more channels, there's going to be more and more creators, there's going to be more and more people out there trying to start their own brand. And you need to look at every single source of data that you have to understand what's working and what's not, and who really are the allies that are propelling your brand.
Fabulous. That is a great note to end on and perfect timing. Thank you all so much for your wisdom, your insight, and your expertise. I've learned an incredible amount and I've enjoyed talking to you all very much. To our audience, thank you so much for dialing in. If you've missed any of the conversation today, you can watch it on demand, and to find more content and case studies by downloading the Launchmetrics report, Brand Ambassador Marketing 2025. We look forward to seeing you at the next BOF Live. Alison, Nicole, Carlota, thank you so very much and have a wonderful rest of your day. See you soon.
So bye, everyone.
Thank you.